really know about Canvas, and over the years, Canvas has worked with more than 16,000 activists around the world. And all of the 16,000 people have one thing in common. None of us or them choose to be an activist. Life made us an activist. And by being an activist, we have been exposed to so many different threats, from online harassments to physical threats, trying to remain sane and in life-threatening situations. And luckily, there is a whole network of organizations who are providing different ways of support to activists in need. So just to mention some of them, like Powered by the People program started in April this year. They launched help desk to provide support to human rights defenders globally in physical and digital security, but also to provide psychosocial support. Freedom House has their own well-known rapid response mechanism. And there are other organizations who are there to support frontline activists and to respond to their requests. Now, like most of you know, like Canvas is made out of activists, and some of us actually spend half of our life talking to other activists about the importance of being proactive rather than reactive. So we started to think hard, what we can do to prevent like physical and digital threats, and how to prevent burnouts when campaigning. So based on these thoughts, with the support of our donor Luminate, we did a whole research on protection and resilience of nonviolent activists. And this is, where I will leave microphone to my wonderful colleagues and friends, Isabella Como and Vanina Weizmann, and to lovely Nyasha from Zimbabwe, who worked with us on this report, and without who this report would not be out. So Isabella, I will let you take the lead, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Breza, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be here and to be sharing on this new research and new ways that we hope to support activists in the future. So today, what we're going to do is have a bit of a discussion around some of the challenges that activists are facing in the field as it relates to protection and resilience. And I'm going to hand over to Nyasha as well as Vanina, and then I'll just wrap up our presentation with an overview of the full research and the deliverable we created in the training curriculum. We'll then open up for a question and answer and an open discussion on the topic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Nyasha here to get us started. And what I'd love for him to do is to introduce himself, to talk about the campaign work that he does and the context in Zimbabwe, what it means to be waging that campaign there. So Nyasha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bella. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just turn on my video. I hope I won't have network challenges. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share the work that I do here in Zimbabwe. And I'm happy to be able to interact with all those people that have managed to join in today. So down here in Zimbabwe, we are a country which is heavily
It looks like your video just interrupted there, Nyasha. Maybe you could go off camera. And try saying something one more time, see if we can hear you. Just when we're going to get to the good bits, huh? Nyasha, I'm going to try muting you and unmuting you. Will that help?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Okay, you just were saying down in Zimbabwe, and you were getting into the context of what it's like to be waging your campaign in Zim.
Exactly. So my campaign largely is that we are trying to promote transparency and accountability in the utilization of natural resources in our country. Our country is one of the countries that is heavily endowed with natural resources that include diamonds, gold, lithium, chrome, you name it. We've got more than 90 minerals in our country. But with all these minerals, there's serious poverty, inequality, uh, corruption, and inflation, which is affecting our country, regardless of all these resources that we have and the generation that and the revenue that we generate every day. Now, because of this corruption, I started a campaign to speak out against the corruption that my government is doing with various countries, of course, including China, Russia, of course, and Brazil and others. The idea for us is to push for the government to ensure that revenue which is generated from natural resources goes to promote service delivery, goes to ensuring that there is enough and adequate health facilities, these kids are able to go to school, and there's access to water and everything. This is the campaign that I'm pushing with my organization called Green Governance Trust. Now, this is something that the government doesn't want to hear because they are a dictatorship and they are authoritarian. They would prefer to spend all the money buying expensive cars, going for holiday, and only ensuring that their families are well taken care of, regardless of what's happening around the country. So every day, and each and every day, I mobilize people to speak out against these inequalities and the abuse of resources happening in my country. But now, just to give you a context, we are working in a country where human rights are abused every day. Recently, our country hosted the Southern Africa Development Cooperation meeting, which was a meeting of 12 African countries, which are here in the Southern Africa region. During this time, we saw more than 46 people being arrested because they wanted to speak out of the human rights issues happening in my country to all other heads of state from the region. 46 people are still in prison 3 months after this event, and the government is not backing down. The same thing happened when we had the BRICS conference in South Africa last year, which was attended by the Chinese president, the president of India, and Brazil too. There was a heavy crackdown on civil society and activists like myself, thereby making it difficult for us to speak out and to operate and to stand for those that are mostly affected. Every day we are surveilled. There's surveillance happening for people like myself and my colleagues that speak against the government. They follow us around. There's also abduction, which happens for people like myself. We also see arbitrary arrests also happening every day. As we walk down the streets, people are taken off by heavy-handed police and soldiers only because they're speaking out against corruption and also trying to promote transparency. Every day there's intimidation and also detention of human rights activists, just like myself. What we are fighting for here is for a country which promotes equality, which promotes human rights, a country which is able to sustain itself from the natural resources that we have. That's all we need. We want kids to be able to go to school. We want women to be able to give birth in clean hospitals. We also want young men to find jobs, young women and young men to find jobs. And for those that are finishing university to get jobs and earn a living and have a better life. Just because of speaking out against my government, you are taken out. You are taken out. Just to share my last part of the story. When I was arrested for speaking out in 2019, I was with my friend. And my friend was abducted as he was going home. This guy lost his life just for speaking out. Today, I think about this friend of mine who lost his life just for speaking out against the government. And as I continue this job, I would fear every day that what is going to happen to me. How can I protect myself, but also at the same time be able to create a society which has got equality, which is thriving, which has got systems that work, because we're able to do that. So this is my story, colleagues, and I think I shared this story with others around the world, here in Africa, in Asia, in South America, that are also facing the same challenges. And I hope together we'll be able to create a society where bring down the dictator. Thank you.
Naisha, thank you so much for that overview. I mean, first, I want to just say you're making me a little bit emotional here, just hearing all of the passion behind your voice and all of the work that you and your colleagues have already achieved in Zimbabwe. And, I also really appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to share some of these threats and the challenges that you all have been facing. It's something I think all of us would agree are felt around the world. So I really appreciate that. And it's something that will be really helpful for the rest of our conversation here. I just have one more question for you. I'd love to hear, thinking about all of these threats and, as you described, some of them are life-threatening. Do you think that there's benefit in activists such as yourself and others in receiving some kind of training on how to prepare and how to potentially thwart those threats or to be ready when that kind of repression occurs? Do you think that would be beneficial for you now? Would it have been beneficial when you were just starting your campaign work?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bella. Yeah, so absolutely. I think just to take you back, some of the incidences that we faced, particularly in the beginning, where my friend lost his life, and also some of these guys were arrested. It was because we were not prepared for what was coming. We underestimated the ruthlessness of the government. And also we didn't really prepare for that time where, abduction would happen, where surveillance would happen. We thought this was just a game until such terrible things started happening. So I believe that training on various issues are important. It could be digital training. It could be, training around, just, guarding yourself against certain threats. A whole lot of training and preparedness needs to be put on human rights activists like myself, so that we guard against, severe threats which could lead to, harm or even death. So I think it's actually very key. Just to mention that even from the emotional side, how do human rights activists get that kind of training to be able to hold themselves together if when they go through such kind of difficult circumstances? So various training from various angles has to happen, not only for myself, but for other activists across the world that actually have even worse situations than myself.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments and that kind of follow-up. It's certainly something that resonates with us. And I just want to mention, something that really stands out to the Canvas team is that, Naisha, you've been living in Zimbabwe your whole life, right? You've been experiencing the repression from an authoritarian government forever. So for you to come forward and to say that even understanding your context and living in it throughout your life, it still would have been beneficial to receive that training before the campaign. It's really helpful context. So thank you for those comments. And what I'd like to kind of do next is pivot over to Vanina. Naisha brought up a really great point at the end there around the emotional well-being, right? So we're facing these threats. We've been living with them our whole lives. And in addition to figuring out how to protect our digital information, our physical well-being, in our research, very early on, we identified this additional ask from activists around emotional well-being and how they can frankly just take care of themselves so that they can keep fighting. So what we did was connect with Vanina, and we're really thrilled she was able to join our project team. And she helped us to build out an entire section in the research as well as the training curriculum around mental health. So I'd love to turn over to Vanina now and ask her to tell us a little bit about the research work we did and really why we decided to undertake the survey activity.
Right. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Right.
thank you.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Bella, for the presentation, and thank you Canvas for inviting me. Actually, it's such an honor for me to work with activists, and it gives me so much purpose, and I love it, and I've been doing it for a few years now. And when Canvas invited me to create this module, because they really realized that like activism without mental health has its limitations, I was telling Breza, I mean, there's nothing out there about activism and their emotional well-being. I mean, I've been a researcher for my entire career, and I was like, I always search, and I have to see, okay, what's not good from what's out there. And there was nothing there. So when I told them I would love to do research, I mean, I feel so grateful because they put all these resources for us to create this survey so that we can really understand what's happening from their mouths and then be able to tailor a model that is tailored to their needs. So we created with so many interns and students and the whole Canvas team this survey that has 95 questions. And I also thought, oh my God, this is so long. Who's going to respond to this? And actually, a lot of people responded because there is a big need to take care about this. And it was totally, anonymous. So people could really be honest. And so far, so if you're an activist, please fill out the survey because we're still in this ongoing research. But so far, 44 people responded from 11 different countries under dictatorships. And it was amazing to see not only what happens to them, but also what they're going through, their physical symptoms, their emotional symptoms, how they cope with what they're going through, and also the resources they have so that we can really understand and create a model that is tailored for that. And I mean, the responses were like amazing. And I mean, I could give some statistics, but for example, 25% of the people that responded have attempted suicide, and more than half have thought of suicide. This is, immense in comparison to the suicidal rate and attempts in other countries, like in the world. So it is really important that we take care of mental health. And I can tell a little bit about the module if you want, but I don't know if I responded to your question or you want something else.
You absolutely did, Vanina. I think next you can definitely tell us about kind of that module and the key objectives that we're aiming in it.
Sure. So like basically a lot of what we saw in the survey are symptoms of anxiety and burnout. So we created a whole module that has psychoeducation. It's really important to understand how our nervous system works, because sometimes, and Brisa was talking about proactive versus reactive, no, there's different moments for activists where it is good to be in fight or flight. It is good to be dissociated, especially, for example, if you're being tortured. So it's not so much about being regulated all the time. It's about being able to switch back and find ways to re-regulate after some events. And also, and sometimes also activists do not really understand that what's happening to their bodies is actually a healthy thing. For example, they're shaking. Shaking is we're taking our trauma out of the body. So the model has some psychoeducation to understand how anxiety and burnout work, how our nervous system works, and also to understand that there are some ways we cope with our burnout or anxiety that is not so helpful, and to create tools, A, to prevent anxiety, burnout, depression to happen, or also to be able to understand, okay, this is where I'm at in the stages of burnout, let's say, and how can I be with it, work on it, and revert it to a healthier way so that actually they can have healthier lives, they can have healthier relationships, and they can have a better impact in their movement and in their fight for freedom. And also we have, I want to also add just a little thing. We also created resources that are free, absolutely free for activists to watch, to read, meditations. So they can also access that, and resources for therapists, because we need trained therapists. There's not a lot of therapists that understand trauma, that understand the nervous system, and that also understand activism, and that understand digital security, because it's a whole combination of things we have to take into account when we're working with activists and human rights defenders.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Vanina. And I appreciate you mentioning that toolkit repository for everyone's awareness. We found that there's a lot of bits and pieces around the world. So our project team combined them, and we're due to have a section on the Canvasopedia website that has those tools in there. So they won't be available to you today. However, there are tools that are scattered throughout our report on the project, and we're going to drop a link to the report being published on there, and you'll be able to see some of those initial tools. And then when the tool kit is published on the website, we'll post on our social media so you can access it. Wonderful. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here and take a step back and talk about the entire curriculum. So as you've heard, we came together, we designed this around protection and resilience. And at the end of the day, what we found through all of our conversations with activists, with experts, and reviewing, previously and active campaigns, having protection and resilience in place better ensures a campaign victory. I think that what Naisha was describing in Zim is a perfect example, right? As we're getting started with a campaign, there's a lot going on. We're juggling a lot of different items, and our opponent is still organized and looking to stop us. And having something in place to prepare us as we get started can really ensure that we're able to build momentum and to continue our campaign, right? So the key items that we really focus on in the research is on physical, which can be thought of as people, locations, all of the tangible kind of items that could be targeted by an opponent. And this would really include the day-to-day. So just going about your regular routine, going to work, dropping off your kids. And it also applies to protection measures during direct actions, right? So what needs to be done to prepare for a street protest or for a boycott or something like this. We also have the digital angle. This really focuses on information, right? One of the most critical aspects of any campaign is its information, its plans, the people that are connected to it and supporting it. And these days that's housed mostly digitally. So this is a core focus within the research and the curriculum. And as we just discussed, mental well-being also being incorporated there, acknowledging that it is as important as these other two items in really ensuring that campaign victory. Now, it's one thing to say you need to have digital, physical, and mental health protection and resilience measures in place, but it's a different story to get it in place, right? And activists are very busy. Campaigns have a lot that they're dealing with. So it's not an easy kind of task. And what we endeavored to do in our research was to come up with a strategy that is imparted through the training curriculums. And it teaches activists how to embed protection into their campaign, make it into a habit, just make it a part of the DNA and the anatomy of what you're doing, right? The idea is that you want to form habits, things that you're just naturally doing in the day-to-day to better ensure protection and to prepare yourself in case there is repression. What that looks like is creating plans, making sure that the structure of the campaign, so if you're in a movement with multiple people, being conscious of how you're communicating with each other, where you're meeting, and the work that you're doing together. It also is in place, really, the key kind of item here when we talk about plans and protocols, being organized for when repression does occur. The reason being is that time is of the absolute essence once repression has happened. And when we have plans in place, when we have exercised those plans and we're all on the same page, we're able to respond very fast. And when we talk about this concretely, responding fast can mean saving someone's life. So a really critical example here, one of the core pieces of a backup plan is making sure that the campaign has medical as well as legal resources in place for when repression occurs. If there's a street protest and someone is severely injured and there's no medical resource that's been identified that's willing to support the activist and help them, it means in that moment you'll be looking for emergency support, right? And that could be the difference between someone being safe versus being having a life-threatening injury, right? So having those plans, immediate access into that medical support, and it will help the campaign to kind of continue fighting. One of the pieces we're really proud about in our trainings and on this particular topic is that it is fully customizable, right? So no environment and no campaign is going to face the same set of risks. What Naisha is talking about is very specific to Zimbabwe, right? Very unique kind of context, focusing on the democratic kind of management of resourcing and supporting the future of the country. That might not be your fight. And you also might not be fighting that fight in a military dictatorship that also has colonial infrastructure, right? So what our team has done is created a process so that we take in information from the participants about what they need in the training. We then tailor it based on the context that they're in and their goals, and then we'll lead the curriculum that way. So the point is that it will be incredibly fit for purpose, and participants walk away with a security strategy as well as a backup plan. I'm going to wrap up here and just give you a little bit of background. And this is kind of a full picture of what we were able to achieve in our research work. So we looked at 57 different countries that are experiencing different levels of kind of threats or repression towards activists. So you can see we hit the full kind of variety of environments from low all the way over to extreme. We also did 11 deep dive interviews with not only with kind of experts in the typical spaces that we were talking about, like physical security or cybersecurity, but we also dove into topics like cryptocurrency and how a campaign can securely use cryptocurrency, as well as artificial intelligence and disinformation, acknowledging that these are really key repressive tactics that governments are waging against activists. We, of course, also had our survey that Vanina talked about. This is absolutely still open. We'd really appreciate any additional kind of respondents to it. And of course, we did deep dive interviews with activists and practitioners from dozens of movements and CSOs. This really helped us to make sure that in our curriculum, our core messaging is focusing on the most kind of trending risks and threats that activists face. Of course, also making sure that we're tailoring the content. So what I'm going to do now is open up to question and answers. I know we've given you all a lot of information here. Let's see which ones have come in. Let me find a copy online. Okay, here's one. So Mona Lisa asked, how do you balance safety concerns with the need to be visible and vocal about issues that our governments are hell-bent on not being accountable to as citizens, given the risks of public advocacy? This is a fantastic question. Absolutely something that should be considered really in any context where activism is being conducted. You know, as we mentioned, we identified in our research that information is one of the most, it's kind of a crown jewel, if you will, of a campaign. So with that said, our research really indicates that campaigns need to design information protection in the structure of their campaign. So what does that mean? In a really extreme kind of scenario, this would mean that everyone within the campaign is anonymous to each other, minus maybe one or two leaders. So it's taking on an anonymous profile in order to do that kind of public advocacy work and doing it on behalf of a campaign through dedicated kind of accounts. So creating a source of truth in terms of communications and messaging from the campaign, but separating it from an individual kind of personality. In less extreme kind of environments, where you're seeing kind of moderate levels of repression and what have you, we would argue that you'd want to take a bit of a hybrid approach, where you would only have a couple of core individuals that are really publicly, transparently connected to the campaign and advocating on its behalf. And then the rest of it is done through accounts that are just dedicated to the campaign. So I wish I could give you a very direct answer. It really depends on the context that you're in, but the short answer is that we do push for greater anonymity even within the movement. Let's see here.
Bella, if I may, because I'm reading the question, so I will just read maybe this one is for Vanina, but could you speak to challenges that impact mental health from within a movement, internal collective action challenges? That's one question, and maybe as we are here, I can read the one. Bella, I think this one is for you. Can you explain based on what we can decide if action is too risky? So Pablo has this question.
Do you want to grab the first one, Vanina?
Yes, for sure. So I was reading through questions and I was thinking of the same one actually. And I think one of the things that is happening in movements is that there is also not a lot of communication amongst the movements. So there is not a space for sharing, for understanding what's happening, for conflict resolution. So we also need to give that a space. So when we talk about mental health, it's not only each activist individually, is to have a healthy movement where communication is possible, difference of opinions are possible, because otherwise conflict happens from within. If it happens within, of course, it's going to happen outside too. So the possibility to share, also a lot of activists, they feel isolated in what's happening for them. So they're already burned out. They're procrastinating because they're burned out. They have survival guilt. They have imposter syndrome, and they feel they're the only ones going through that. And then this also, you know, when all of us in the movement are feeling this way, we're already cynical, we are hopeless sometimes, and we feel helpless. Like, it affects others. We have anger because, you know, if our trauma hasn't been dealt, anger attacks can come up. So it is really important to take care of the well-being, not only of each individual, but also of the movement, and have practices so that communication can happen and, you know, conflict can be resolved. It's not that conflict is not going to be there, but we can work through it.
I think that's a great point, Vanina. And I'd just add that, you know, one of those key mechanisms that you could really look towards and that Canvas feels very passionately about is nonviolent communication. The movement really taking that on as part of adopting nonviolent discipline. And nonviolent communication is really focused on conflict resolution, really looking towards, focusing on me statements, things like this. So it's baking that into the philosophy and the way that the campaign is kind of working. From Pablo, can you explain based on what we can decide if an action is too risky? Absolutely. A key tool for any activist is a risk assessment, right? A risk assessment should be a go-to and something that's being used for most anything that you're doing, especially if you want to understand the potential threats to an action you're undertaking and how viable the mitigation or the protection measures are that you've put in place, right? So it's really up to you as an individual to decipher if a behavior is too risky. We refer to that as risk tolerance or a risk appetite. So it's going to be different for everybody. If you conduct a risk assessment and decipher that a direct action, let's say a protest, is too risky, what we recommend is that you pivot the type of action that you want to undertake in order to achieve that objective so that you can then reduce the risk. For a street protest, that might look like, oh, we're going to turn to a kind of act of civil disobedience using inanimate objects, right? Or we might wait to undertake those protests until we have 100,000 followers, because it will reduce the likelihood that the security forces will use live ammunition on such a large crowd. I hope that answers your question. Let's see. What constitutes an emergency and how quickly should we respond to an emergency situation? This similarly depends really on the circumstances that you're in. For some activists, having a social media account shut down might be considered an emergency situation because it's cutting off their means to be able to advocate to their supporters. Whereas for others, an emergency situation might kind of reach up to if someone has been injured or arrested. For the most part, you're going to be looking at repressive acts that are coming from very sophisticated governments as well as criminal organizations. And to that end, we would recommend that you aim to respond as quickly as possible to whatever you define as an emergency situation. And the way that you can do that is by creating a plan before the repression actually occurs and trying it out so that you can be prepared in case it happens.
And Bella, there is for Vanina, a couple of questions regarding the burnout. So I would just kind of try to wrap it up in one question. So how to overcome burnout? I know that's the big portion of the curriculum, but maybe just few lines, few tips for what to have in mind when we are talking about activist burnout.
Sure, thank you, Brisa. And I see also one question about, talking about burnout as a weakness, no, or being perceived as weak. And I think this is really important for activists, and I want to validate that because there is such a stigma on mental health. And there is such an idea that we have to be strong and that if things happen to us, we're weak. And I want to just if there's something about the conversation today that I want you to live with is that being vulnerable, and especially in your movement, is not being weak. If you don't listen to your burnout, eventually the body first whispers, then screams, and then you're completely collapsed and you cannot do anything. And there's where you're weak. So what I want to say is just the idea that burnout, anxiety, or well-being, you don't have to call it mental health, you can call it resilience, has to be part of the conversation as an obvious thing. Everybody, I can say every activist I worked with is burned out. It, in some way of the scale, is burnout. So if we take it as an obvious thing, okay, we're going to talk about digital security, and today we're going to talk about anxiety. And we all go through it. We all have a nervous system. We all dysregulate. We all feel fear. So just making it a part, like you know, eventually the stigma will leave. A few years ago, we didn't talk about mental health and activism. And now all the conferences have someone there supporting, and we're, you know, getting trained and learning and doing research now, and eventually we're going to publish. So, you know, it's wonderful that, you know, it starts to become something that is an obvious thing. So this is the first thing I want to say. So to take away this idea that being burned out is being weak. Being burned out is all these things happened to me, and therefore this is where I am. You are not weak. You went through a lot of challenges and atrocities. And then there's different tools, no? So first, understanding where you are in the scale of burnout. And then there's tools to prevent it or to support you in the everyday life. These tools can look like meditation, nervous system regulation techniques, somatic techniques, breathing techniques, moving the body, shaking the shock out of the body, sharing with people that you can trust, doing therapy, trauma-informed therapy. So there's plenty like going in nature. Some things you have access today, no? So every day you can sit, you can put a 5-minute meditation. There's always time for 5 minutes, you know, this idea that there's no time. And, you know, it's a titrated way of teaching your nervous system to regulate and also to broaden, so you can be with everything that is happening. Because if we're waiting for the outside to change so that we're okay, it's not great. We're disempowered. So it's like learning to be empowered in our lives, in our nervous system. And that would also help the movement, and that would also help our relationship, and that would also help our health. So you're going to see, you're going to have all the list of techniques, and we're, you know, creating more things for you. But I would say first, awareness of where you're at is key. And then just every day, a little tool. For some people, it's cooking, you know, just to be present in one activity without the mind racing on what if, or, oh, this happened to me and, you know, I'm never going to get out of it.
There's plenty more questions, Bella, for you now. So
Yeah,
if you
sorry,
don't
I was
mind,
struggling to unmute
yeah,
there.
yeah.
I just wanted to mention too to everybody. So when Vanina came into our project team, we started looking at some of the materials on the burnout and what we were going to put together. And let me tell you, the entire project team had an enlightening moment where we were like, oh, we're all burning out. Here I am on the spectrum. And then going through and seeing the materials. So I can't advocate enough for this first concept of just awareness and putting yourself into a place where you can say, am I experiencing this? And just having that moment of being just truthful with yourself. I found that very empowering, you know, let alone taking on the techniques as well to balance it. Okay. Let's see.
So there's a couple of questions for you, Bella, and then we can go back to Vanina if you don't mind.
Sure.
And sorry, do you want to say something, Ira? So because there is really one that I want to hear the answer. What role does public solidarity by international network play in well-being and security for activists? And how can we build solidarity networks with so many competing crises around the world? So, I mean, Canvas cannot do it all.
Yeah, I can grab that one, Breza. And I think it's very much related as well to Mona Lisa's question regarding why are funders focusing on, you know, emergency support in the last kind of 3 months. I'm reading that, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong. Why is the focus on the reaction, the post-repression, rather than the preparation? So I think these are two interconnected pieces. What I will say in our research, and to Vanina's point as well, there's a lot of pockets of information. And a lot of us are adopting mechanisms of protection and resilience without acknowledging those behaviors as being protection or resilience, right? So for instance, for anybody that uses the Signal application, I have to ask, why are you using Signal compared to other applications, right? That's a protection measure that you're taking in choosing that kind of avenue. And what it really comes down to is all of us being better about sharing what our knowledge is and dedicating our collective efforts to improving what mechanisms are in place for activists and what our learnings are. On top of that, I'd also argue that a really big place where the international network comes into play is really communicating the need for proactive training and developing strategies and plans before repression occurs. So connecting into the international network and the international network connecting into campaigns is a really key part of that. So I just advocate for all of us here to continue to openly communicate about the work we're doing in this space and to really focus on that proactive preparation, because emergency support is needed when repression occurs, but we can genuinely save lives if we focus on that proactive preparation work. Vanina, Breza, anything to add on that solidarity angle with the international network, especially on the kind of donor side?
There is a lot of effort now recently, especially with this with USAID's Powered by the People program, where we are trying actually to network with regional organizations who are doing the similar work and focusing more regionally. So knowing the context, knowing the mentality, it makes a lot of sense. But also, you know, kind of networking with these global networks and trying to provide support. I think that, and from what I heard from Vanina, the important thing is actually to realize that you are not alone and that your feelings are not because you are crazy or weak or anything else. It is a common feeling when you are an activist, when you are facing life threats, when your family is facing threats, when you spend some time in jail and then you're targeted as as a criminal because of the activities you did. So those all things, you know, are really life-changing, really difficult to handle. And this kind of horizontal learning that Canvas is talking a lot is very important, because that gives us feeling that, you know, we are not alone, but also gives us opportunity to learn from the experience of others. And this is why I will now maybe ask a question for Nyasha, if he can share, you know, like the Nyasha, if you're still here. I don't know if your internet connection is stable now. If you can share some of your experience of how you remain safe and sane when doing your activism in Zimbabwe.
Thanks a lot, Breza. I've been following the conversation, quite interesting. Views there and also questions. So just to say one thing. So one thing that I always say is that I fear the crackdown on activists to the point where we don't have activists anymore. And this is what dictators are trying to achieve, you know, and they've got so many ways to just make people fearful and tired, you know, and sometimes feel bad about what they are doing, you know. So one of the things that I also do is that I am not reckless, you know. I am so conscious of what I'm doing. I'm not reckless, because there's a time when I was reckless around just hanging out with so many people without not really taking, you know, attention to who is around me, for instance. You know, not practicing any digital security. Those things put you in a space where you are more vulnerable. So I have a pattern of doing things. And this is one thing that I have learned through Canvas, through Vanina, when I met her recently, you know, so in so many people. So a conscious process of, you know, ensuring that you embed certain principles and practices in life are important. Because obviously, if you're an activist and you're targeted, you're not an ordinary person anymore. You know, you have to be so conscious around, security of the data on your laptop, on your phone, and so forth. But one key important.
We lost you again, but it's been most important. Nyasha, are you back? Nyasha? I think like Zimbabwe internet was always a challenge, right? Yeah, maybe.
We can grab another question while we're waiting
Yeah.
for Nisha to come back on.
Bella, if you were following the questions, go ahead. Yeah.
There's a couple that have come up that I think are important that I'd love to talk about here, which is on the cyberbullying side. And I'd love for Vanina to jump in on the mental health bit. But we didn't speak with one activist in our interviews that hasn't experienced rampant cyberbullying, primarily by way of bots. It is absolutely a standard repressive tactic that we're seeing from governments as well as from like other non-state groups as a means of intimidation and psychological warfare. That's what it's really aimed at doing. It's just as Nisha was describing, it's meant to relay fear and to cause those kind of psychological challenges to stop you from continuing on your activism. So first, acknowledging what the purpose is of that repression tactic is very important, and understanding the value of the accounts that you're using and where you're experiencing that kind of cyberbullying is important. What I mean by that is take a bit of a cost benefit analysis to understand, is it worth this platform to be receiving that level of cyberbullying? I'd argue that X is becoming a deep and dark web forum. There's absolutely no regulation on it, and it's absolutely controlled by repressive governments and those using cyber bots. So that would be a good example where you could ask yourself, is it even worth us using this platform? Perhaps we should turn to another one. But that's on the digital side of it. There's other mechanisms. We don't have a lot of time, so I won't get into it, but there's basic cyber hygiene practices you want to put in place to protect yourself from a digital side. But arguably speaking, that's all psychological warfare. So I'm going to turn over to Vanina. I think the mental health angle is more important on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Bella. I mean, as you said, no, every activist I've worked with has had some kind of cyberbullying. And so it's good to see, first of all, if this is happening for you, there's something you're doing that is actually good. That's why you're being cyberbullied. But I understand that this brings a lot of shame, and B, a lot of difficulties also in relationships. I've found that some activists, they feel that some people are stopping to talk to them, or they lost some friends. And this is not because, we have to reframe this. It's not because of betrayal, it's because of fear again, no? So it creates also fear in the surrounding. For me, what I found that it's because you're gonna go through it, and of course you can take care, like Bella was saying, about choosing which platform you post. It's also about, can I be okay with the fact that this is happening because my purpose in the scale is more important than this? No? So it's like keeping this purpose of why am I doing this? Why am I doing this is always helpful. And then again, finding tools to regulate when this is happening, finding tools to have space for this as one other challenge in the movement and in your fight. But you're gonna go through it. It's not something that you can avoid, unfortunately.
We have only 2 minutes, but Nyasha is back, so I want to give a last try for Nyasha to just tell us, the key important thing that worked during your activism. Nyasha, can you hear us? Nyasha?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I can hear you. Yeah, my network is quite bad. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry for I keep on dropping. But yeah, so there are certain key important things that we need to recognize in as activists, such things such as security, and be able to have a plan which doesn't have so many gaps. So at the end, I was trying to say that sometimes we fall into traps because our plan is not well developed, it's not well coiled up. So we find ourselves in the middle of danger because we don't have a clear plan of our campaign, of our activism, or even of our strategy as institutions, as activists. So we need to watch out for that. But most importantly, the wellness part is also important. Sometimes when we are tired, we don't do the best job.
Every time when he says most importantly, his internet somehow crashes. So when we are talking about digital security, I would say. Um, I'm sorry, Nyasha, we can't hear you. So yeah, and it's okay. So sorry, everyone. I mean, I'm sure we are all aware of the difficulties with the internet in some countries. So since we are, I think, in the last minute of this webinar, I don't know if maybe Bella or Vanina has some final wording before we wrap up.
Yeah, I'll just say this. We feel very passionately that this is important for any activist to consider and to take on. And we're really grateful for your time today and for joining the discussion. We very much would like to start planning and supporting activists in training on this topic. If you're interested in receiving a training for yourself and your fellow colleagues, or if you're interested in supporting to fund a specific training, we really welcome those follow-on conversations. We want to ensure everyone is able to continue fighting for democracy while also doing everything they can to stay safe and sane.
Yes, and thank you all for joining. And this is just the beginning of much more, no? So yeah, as Bella was saying, like we're so honored and passionate about this.
Thank you everyone for joining. Make sure that you join us on our 6th People Power Academy, which will happen from April 2nd to April 4th. On April 2nd, we will continue this conversation with more activists, with more stories, with more experts, and with more stable internet. So yeah, so please join us. It's going to be hybrid. It's going to be in person in Charlottesville, but also online. We will share the information. Follow us on the social media and make sure that you register for the next People Power Academy in 2025. Thank you for joining. This was great. Vanina, Bella, Nyasha, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful work you did and for being part of the team. So bye, everyone. see you. People are still writing, so
Yeah, just in case anyone wants the chat, I'm just gonna make her for a minute. All right, team. I have to run to another meeting.
thank you.
So, my pleasure. Wonderful conversation, and we'll connect very soon.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Bella.
Talk to you soon. Thank you,
Bye.
Anina. Thank you, Bella. Bye.
Thank you, Vanina. Thank you, Yelena. Thanks, Breza. Bye.
I think we can leave now, Milica.
Yes.